right, good morning, 169. All right, so here is my video for our week 1 review. So hopefully hit some key things, reiterate some stuff that was said during class time, and help prepare you for the tests based on the material. All right, so the chapters that we covered were 4, 6, 8, and 10 that will be covered on the test. All right, so you have your nursing process, you have documentation, you have cultural, and then you have death and dying. So those are the 4 chapters. In addition, there is a few dosage calc questions. So as we spoke in class yesterday, conversions. So you need to know how to do your conversions. So you have your Fahrenheit to Celsius, you have your pounds to kilograms, you have your milliliters to teaspoons, just some examples. So be familiar with that. Okay, that's the best start. That is one of the best ways to start with your dosage calc, because if you don't know how to do your conversions or do the formula for your conversions, then that can mess your problem formula up. All right, so chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the nursing process, ADPI, right? Assessment, diagnosis, planning, implementation, evaluation. So if you put them all together, you got to think you have to do an assessment on what's going on, right? Whether it's an interview, a physical, gathering data from the chart, you have to do your assessment. Then from there, based on what the problem is or what your assessment shows, is where you come up with your NANDA, your nursing diagnosis. All right, and then it has to be relevant to the problem at hand. So after we have our nursing diagnosis, that show you have your A, you have your D. So from there, I'm like, okay, this is what's going on with my patient. So my plan is going to be A, B, and C. What am I going to do to help that problem get better? Okay, after I have my plan, I'm going to implement it. After I implement it, I want to evaluate it, right? Because if we don't evaluate, how do we know it was any good? That's everything we do in life. Okay, so ADPI. Best thing, right? Critical thinking. What is critical thinking? All right. Okay, so, and then our long-term, short-term goals. All right, long-term goal achieved before discharge, after discharge. Okay, short-term goals before discharge, after discharge. And what is our expected outcome? What were some of the criteria when we talked about expected outcomes? They need to be measurable. They need to be realistic. And they need to be specific to the patient. Okay? Those are the key concepts of chapter 4. Okay? Chapter 6, we have our documentation and communication. Communication, not documentation. Wrong chapter, sorry. Okay, so communication, therapeutic communication. All right, like I told you before, you need to know that box that has all the therapeutic communication techniques. Box 6.2. All right, you got to be able to recognize them in scenarios. And then how do we do it? We're going to, the next few days during simulation, we'll practice some of those. Okay, and SBAR. What is SBAR? Situation, background, assessment, recommendation. What's the purpose of an SBAR? Or ISBAR. The I is the introduction and the extra R at the end is readback. Right, so it just depends on where you're at. But what's the purpose of it? Why do we use SBAR? What's why thing? Aphasia. Okay, again, box 6.7 and 6.8, be familiar with that. Wernicke's aphasia, what does that consist of? Okay, and how do we work with these patients that have aphasia? Okay, so what are some of our communication techniques to use as a nurse? Chapter 8 is our cultural. All right, what is our cultural and spiritual aspects of care? What's cultural awareness? What's cultural sensitivity? What do we do when we have a language barrier? All right, and then 10 is our death and dying, grief. All right, hospice. So what are the stages of Kubler-Ross? Need to know those stages. Also need to know the palliative and hospice, the difference. When does someone go on hospice and how long does it care for the family afterwards? All right, now to kind of hopefully got your brain going, we're going to go a little more deeper to chapter 4. What is our 3-part nursing diagnosis and what is our 2-part? So our PEs, you need to be able to recognize them. We need to be able to write them. And we've done some of those. So we should. What about how do we evaluate a goal? What is the best way to evaluate goals? Maslow's, need to know Maslow's. Why is it important to know Maslow's as a nurse? How can we know if our outcome statements are written correctly? Remember when we're looking at the different variations of our planning stage, what is consistent in our planning stage? All right, what's consistent in our evaluation stage, our implementation stage? Okay, what are we looking for in those stages of our nursing process? Therapeutic communication, when a patient is avoiding you or a staff member is avoiding you, what are those, how does that feel? What does that look like? When somebody's aggressive, what is an aggressive person act like? I need to know the difference between all those. Okay, again, going back to our therapeutic communication. When a patient, do we ever want to be biased when a patient is telling us something? Or do we want non-biased, non-judgmental, and we should never belittle a patient, right? No matter what their beliefs are. Spiritual distress, going back to chapter 10. Sorry, I got a little off my notes. What if somebody's in spiritual distress, what do we do? Okay. If somebody is in that loss and grief and dying, is it okay to put your hand on their shoulder if it's okay with their culture? Is that showing a caring demeanor? And is that part of our kinesthetic learning, right? If you have somebody who's terminally ill or on hospice and their respirations are 8, but they're afraid, listen, maybe 10 or 11, but they're afraid to take pain medication, what do we do? Do we just document it, or do we encourage them and explain to them that it's okay, that addiction is not a problem at this point? Advance directives, need to know them. Living wills, power of attorney. All right, DNRs. What is a DNR? Or DNR? DNAR. All right. What is the purpose of it? When we're looking at our test questions and select all, remember, look at each one as a true or false, or does it apply when you're doing your test questions for true or false, and answer them individually, and that should help you, guide you. Don't overthink the questions, don't add anything into it. All right, so again, nursing process, communication, death and dying, and culture. So culture, you need to be able to recognize cultural awareness, cultural sensitivity, and what do we do in those cultures? We're working with people from different cultures. All right, I hope this helped, and I will see you guys here shortly.